The Brexit Party tops the polls in the EU elections, with the Conservatives and Labour Party suffering heavy losses. Leader Nigel Farage said members of the Brexit Party should now join the government's team negotiating with the European Union.
If we don't leave on October the 31st, then the scores you've seen for the Brexit Party today will be repeated in a general election, and we are getting ready for it.
The Liberal Democrats, who campaigned to stop Brexit, moved up to second with around 20% of the vote. The Conservatives are pushed into fifth place with an historic low of less than 10%, while Labour fall to third place overall. Well, we'll be looking at all the results and we'll have the latest from around Europe. Also this lunchtime, a man and woman appear in court charged with the murder of two teenagers in Sheffield. And the clearest ever moving footage of Queen Victoria discovered in a museum in New York.
Later in the hour on the BBC News channel, we'll have all the latest reports, results, interviews and features from the BBC Sports Centre.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Nigel Farage's Brexit Party are celebrating victory in the European parliamentary elections. It won nearly a third of the vote on a platform of honouring the result of the Brexit referendum with what it called a clean break from the EU. But there were also huge gains for the Liberal Democrats, who won in London with their calls for a second referendum and a strong pro-Remain message. Well, it was a disastrous night, meanwhile, for both the main parties, Labour and the Conservatives, both suffering sweeping losses across the board. Well, the Brexit Party got nearly 32%, the Liberal Democrats 20%, that's up 13% on 2014. The Greens, the SNP and Plaid also made gains. The Labour vote was down 11% and the Tories came in fifth place with just 9% of the vote, down nearly 15%. Our political correspondent Tom Barnes' report now does contain some flashing images.
Smiling faces for members of a party that was only launched 6 weeks ago. The Brexit Party, the clear winners of this election, taking almost a third of the vote and 29 MEPs.
Yeah, Brexit.
The party's leader saying that this could be just the start.
If we don't leave on October the 31st, then the scores you've seen for the Brexit Party today will be repeated in a general election, and we are getting ready for it.
It wasn't just a good night for the Brexit Party. Those standing on a clear Remain platform also made great leaps forward. The Greens beat the Conservatives into fourth place, while it was a champagne moment for the Liberal Democrats, coming in second with 20% of the vote.
This is the first time in 100 years that we've beaten both the Conservative and the Labour Party in the same election, and we are clearly able to demonstrate that both the Conservative and Labour Party did badly because they were absolutely split, couldn't articulate what they wanted on Brexit. We've been very clear we are the strongest Remain party.
The one thing that is clear from this result is that voters don't like the tightrope walk Brexit compromises that the two main parties have been offering up to now. What then does that mean for the future? Well, both for Labour and the Conservatives. It means that they're going to be under pressure to adopt simpler, clearer positions. For the Tories, devastation at the polls is likely to see leadership candidates taking even tougher positions.
This is the worst result in our party's history in elections. And it's a wake-up call to my colleagues in Parliament that we have to deliver on the instruction the British people gave us in 2016 in the Brexit referendum.
In Scotland, Labour has been wiped out in the face of an SNP surge, while in Wales, the party was forced into third place. The pressure now on the leadership, including from some senior voices, to back another referendum. Jeremy Corbyn today promising to listen.
What you have from me today is a commitment that our party is listening to its members and its supporters and reaching out to other parties across the House of Commons to prevent a crashing out from the European Union with no deal. A commitment that the future will of course be put to a public vote, as we have already proposed in Parliament.
These results providing no easy answers for the parties when they return to Westminster next week. Tom Barton, BBC News, Westminster.
So, as we've been hearing, the Brexit Party have topped polls in every part of the UK apart from Scotland, which was won by the SNP, and London by the Liberal Democrats. Northern Ireland still to declare. Rita Chakrabarti has been taking a look through the results.
This has been an election of stark contrast, with the Brexit Party putting in a very impressive performance, but strong performances too from the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, and a real disaster for Labour and the Conservatives. Let's take a look at some of the details. Castle Point here in the east of England. This was one of the Brexit Party's strongest results. Look at that, 59% of the vote here in a very Leave voting area, but a really, really strong performance, leaving all the other parties behind there. Brexit Party also coming out on top in Windsor and Maidenhead. That's Theresa May's constituency, her own backyard. They came out on top in St Helens here in the northwest, beating Labour in their own heartland. Look at that. Brexit Party on 35% and the Labour Party on 22%. For the Liberal Democrats, it was also a very good night. Here in Elmbridge, for example, they topped the poll by 39%. Now, this is an area that had been Conservative for the last 3 European elections. And if we take a little look at the change in the share of the vote, look at that. The Conservatives plummeting by 31% to the benefit of the Liberal Democrats. For the Lib Dems, it was a great night in London. They topped the poll in London, and that included Islington, which is Jeremy Corbyn's constituency. That tale of Labour woe was reproduced in Scotland, where the SNP took almost all the areas, all the local authority areas that there are, and in Blaenau Gwent, Labour also suffered there at the hands of the Brexit Party. One word for the Greens, who came top in 3 areas, and that included Bristol as well, and they'll be very happy with their performance at this election. I think the takeaway, though, from these elections is the result for the Conservative Party, who on 9% of the vote share came 5th in the table. And there is one remarkable fact for the governing party, which is that in the whole of the United Kingdom, they failed to top the vote in any single local authority area in this entire election.
Rita Chakrabarti there. Let's go to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's at Westminster. And Norman, normally we talk about small parties being squeezed. Last night it was the big parties that got squeezed. How do you see the fallout there at Westminster?
I think, Ben, what we're seeing is that the 2 main parties are being dragged by the scruff of their neck away from the centre ground, the sort of confused middle ground which they've been trying to occupy over the past 3 years. It means that the next Tory leader, whoever he or she is going to be pushed remorselessly towards backing no deal or leaving the EU without any sort of agreement on October the 31st. And frankly, it's a similar story on the Labour side, where we've already seen Mr Corbyn being pressed by some of his own shadow cabinet to get off that rickety old fence and to back another referendum. Why? Because he too is hemorrhaging votes. And you're left with the conclusion that after 3 years of going round and round over Brexit, we're pretty much back to where we were at that initial referendum. Namely, you're either pro-Leave or pro-Remain, pro-no deal or pro-backing another referendum. All
right, Norman, thank you very much indeed. Norman Smith there, our assistant political editor. Well, a national picture of the vote was reflected in Southampton, where Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage heard he had been elected as an MEP, and the Liberal Democrats also did well. Duncan Kennedy reports now from Southampton, and a warning, there is some flash photography in his report.
The smile on the face of Nigel Farage was almost enough to dim the lights of Southampton. Here in Sea City, he believes we've seen a sea change in British politics. Southampton is a stopover for Britain's European cruise industry. But last night's results revealed voters here want to change the old political certainties. They think the Brexit Party is the only serious way to deliver the referendum result. May I ask who you voted for?
Of course you can. Brexit. It's the only vote, isn't it?
Why?
Why? To get out and let's be strong again.
Was this a Nigel Farage Midas moment, or simply the loss of confidence in the others? The Brexit Party won 4 seats here, the Lib Dems 3, with the Tories, Labour and Greens on 1. Did you go Lib Dem because they are a Remain party?
No, actually I didn't, no. It was more a protest vote against the other two, I think.
You voted for Change UK.
Yes.
You're a Remainer.
I am.
Why did you go that way?
I don't think anyone else is sorting out Brexit at all at the moment.
You also get the sense many here were floating voters who simply didn't know which party to support. What do you think about the Nigel Farage coming out on top with Brexit and the Lib Dem second?
I think it was a surprise, really. I don't think anyone really thought that was going to happen. But I think no matter what party you vote for at the moment, I think no one really has an idea of what they're doing.
Around 2 million people voted here, but in essence it's another in-out split. It may not make us feel the way we want. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, Southampton.
Well, in a moment, we'll be in Cardiff after a good night for the Brexit Party in Wales. But first, the result in Scotland has just been announced. So let's go straight to our correspondent, Lorna Gordon, who's in Glasgow for us now. Lorna.
Yeah, Ben, good night for the SNP here in Scotland. This was their best ever result in a European election. They topped the polls. They increased their share of the vote to nearly 38%. They increased their number of MEPs to 3 out of the total of 6 available. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has called this a spectacular and historic result. She said it showed that the UK political system has failed Scotland utterly and that Scotland rejects Brexit. Important to note, though, of course, that 1 million people here in Scotland did vote for Brexit. The Brexit Party has secured 1 seat, as have the Conservatives, as have the Liberal Democrats. A bad night, though, here in Scotland for Labour. They had a really dismal showing and turned up 5th in the vote. SNP, though, the clear winners. They'll be hoping to get some momentum from that result in their calls for a second independence referendum in the event of a no-deal Brexit.
Here in Wales, there's no doubt the Brexit Party has been celebrating. They won 1/3 of the vote here, as well as gaining 2 out of Wales's 4 MEPs. Also celebrating Plaid Cymru coming second in the result last night, meaning that they outperformed Labour for the first time in the party's history. But serious questions being asked about what went wrong for Labour. The last time they came 3rd in Wales was back in 1910. They're a party of government here and had been very cautious about not calling for another referendum on Brexit. That decision coming under severe criticism from senior members of the Welsh Government this morning. In the past half an hour, the First Minister of Wales, Labour's Mark Drakeford, has heeded that advice and has called for another referendum. Now, he's seen as being very close to Jeremy Corbyn, but whether or not the leader of UK Labour will listen to his Welsh Labour counterpart remains to be seen.
Arwen, thank you very much indeed. Arwen Jones for us. Well, across Europe, traditional parties have also suffered losses. The big centre-right and centre-left blocs have lost their combined majority amid an increase in support for Liberals, the Greens and nationalist parties. Nationalists were victorious in Italy, France and, of course, here in the UK. But pro-EU parties are still expected to be in a majority, as our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticus now reports.
Across Europe, one of the surprises of these elections, Green parties. This was Germany, where they surged into second place. Germany's result mirrored the picture Europe-wide. The traditional centre, conservative right, social democrat left on the slide, Greens and others profited. So now the Greens are being courted by those old parties looking for their support.
people are talking to us. Obviously, they are keen to have the Greens around the table. And so if we are invited around the negotiating table, we'll go there.
And it's possible the centre-right, under pressure, might now fragment further.
It's a totally new situation, a totally new setup, and I really believe, I'm convinced, that the vote of the European citizens has a clear message that European Union must be reformed in order to be strong again.
For the Greens and all the other parties, how their national results translate into power here in the European Parliament is through the alliances they can forge. And what's clear there is that the surge some predicted for far-right anti-EU forces hasn't materialised. That didn't mean any real celebrations for Emmanuel Macron's party in France. It was beaten just by Marine Le Pen's far-right EU sceptics. But it wasn't a decisive win for her. Her share of seats may actually have fallen. It was Matteo Salvini's far-right League in Italy that was a big winner. However, his allies elsewhere in Europe stumbled, losing seats, limiting his influence. So the most significant gains of all may have gone to the Liberals. Their candidate might now be in with a chance of securing the top EU job on offer, President of the European Commission.
The monopoly of power is broken. And this is, of course, why we can do something else.
Overall, then, the EU's centre under pressure has held firm, but change may still be coming. And so, in these first EU elections since the UK referendum, there's been no Brexit effect. Yes, the nationalist Eurosceptics did well in France and Italy, but not well enough to shift the balance. And they, having seen the UK's example, have softened their stance, not calling for the exit of their own countries. So, in total, the EU, there's a sense, is moving on, leaving the UK to argue and resolve about Brexit itself. Ben.
Damien, thank you. Damien Grammaticus there, our Europe correspondent, with the latest from Brussels. Look at today's other news now, and a man and woman have appeared in court charged with the murder of two teenagers who died in a house in Sheffield on Friday morning. The woman, who is the mother of the dead children, is also accused of the attempted murder of two other children. Well, our correspondent Alison Freeman is at the court now. Alison.
Yes, Ben, the two defendants appeared in the dock here at Sheffield Magistrates Court this morning, both wearing grey T-shirts. Sarah Barris, who's 34, is accused of 2 counts of murder over the deaths of 2 children. They were her sons Blake, who was 14, and Tristan, who was 13, at a house in Sheffield on Friday morning. Now, she's also accused of 3 charges of attempted murder relating to 2 other children. The man, Brendan Machin, who's 37, also faced 2 counts of murder. Now, no pleas were given in court today, and the pair were remanded in custody to appear at Sheffield Crown Court tomorrow morning. Ben.
Alison, thank you. Alison Freeman there in Sheffield. Now, what is believed to be the clearest ever moving footage of Queen Victoria has been discovered in the film archive of a museum in New York. Our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, has this exclusive report.
Queen Victoria in sharper focus than ever seen before. This was her last trip to Ireland in 1900 and is believed to be the last time she was filmed before her death less than a year later.
It's the best view you will ever get of Queen Victoria in moving pictures.
The footage had been stored for decades in New York's Museum of Modern Art, but it was only when Brian E. Dixon, a curator with the British Film Institute, was shown it that its historical significance was truly realised.
I nearly fell off my chair because I'd never seen Queen Victoria in close-up before. It's completely unique because you can see the Queen's face for the first time probably since 1900, since this was shown. It's close up. You can see expressions, you can see her in movement rather than just as a stiff portrait or a still photograph.
Queen Victoria embraced the new medium of film. She and Tsar Nicholas II were filmed at Balmoral in 1896, and the following year 40 cameras were used to capture the Queen's Diamond Jubilee.
Very much film was an extension of a whole series of image making about Queen Victoria.
It makes her seem real.
It makes her seem real, and she is real.
But what sets this film apart is the level of detail, and that's largely down to the film's size. 68mm on the left, and on the right the footage was filmed in 35mm, a cheaper format which became the industry standard despite the loss of detail. The result? Very few films of such high quality were made, and no others capture so clearly this living, breathing, moving monarch. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
And that's it from me. Now on BBC One, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.